Very appreciative. So I'm here to tell you today, talk to you a little further about being fully present, how we might do that. There's an old story that comes from pre-telephone days when a young man applied for a job as a telegraph operator. He answered an ad in the newspaper and went to the telegraph office to await an interview. Though he knew Morse code like all the others, he was qualified in every other way. There were several other applicants in the waiting room, and it was a large, noisy room where all these other people were waiting. So he saw customers coming and going and heard a telegraph clicking away in the background. He also noticed a sign on the applicants or the receptionist counter instructing applicants to fill out a form and waiting to be summoned into the inner office for an interview. So he filled out the form, sat down to wait. And after a few minutes, the young man stood up, crossed the room to the door at the inner office, walked right in. Well, all the others are sitting there, they're totally dismayed. They're sitting there thinking, well, what kind of arrogant guy is this that he just gets up and goes in front of us? We've been waiting all this time. He just got up and went in. So after several minutes, the manager and the applicant came out, and the manager said, "I'm sorry, you may all go home. Thank you for coming, but this young man has gotten a job." So admittedly, they're all sitting there wondering what in the world happened here. We came with an understanding that this was equal opportunity, or we thought it was. He's gotten the job. Well, what happened was the telegraph in the distance that was tapping away. All the time they were sitting there noisily distracted and talking and doing everything else in the world, horsing around. This young man came in and listened. And in the distance, the Morse code was saying, "If you understand this, come in for your interview now." And it kept saying that over and over and over again. And he was the only one that was listening. Isn't that cool? We know there are all sorts of ways of listening for God. I was talking with my husband yesterday about all the ways that there have been of communicating over all the years. The indigenous people, of course, used smoke signals. Wasn't that interesting? To get their point across to someone way over there. They use smoke signals. And did you know that smoke signals are still in place today? Did you know that? They are still being used. At the Vatican, when they vote in a new pope, when the public knows there's going to be a vote, they use smoke to show that whether a new pope was indeed voted in or wasn't. And they use a bit of color in the smoke, and if there is a new pope that has been voted in, they use white smoke. And if not, they put a little black color into the smoke, and that's how people know. So isn't that interesting? Been used all these years. But we also know that there were, and my husband reminded me of that, in Australia they used a tool that would, I can't remember the name of it, but would make a sound that could be heard at great distances. And of course there were horns, shells, all sorts of ways that we've communicated over the years. And of course, with the invention of the Morse code and the telegraph, that was the huge, huge turning point in communication. And then during wars, of course, they had to somehow scatter that communication, or at night, ships sometimes would use lights instead of the Morse code. So it's just an interesting thing. I found it very interesting to think about, but I'm getting a little bit off course because I wanted to talk to you about listening and being fully present and hearing. And that's what the young man did, wasn't it? He was not allowing all those distractions to keep him from his purpose that day. And his purpose was to apply for that job and get it, if at all possible. I was thinking of all the ways that we might spend our time being fully present. And if you are like many, you have a very, very difficult time doing that. But you might find your way of doing that. Dan was at his shop in Bay St. Louis this week. As it turns out, a man that, he helped build this building, as a matter of fact, for us, not for me. It was for us. I wanted to correct myself. But he had broken his workers had broken the auger on the machine where they dig for the pilings to build a house on. And so Dan and a friend of his, John, they do some welding just as a hobby. They don't earn money. Somebody asked him if he earns money there at his shop in Bay St. Louis. I said, "Are you kidding me?" He spends money by the day that he's there, but he's having a really, really good time doing it. But that's okay. He earned it all, so he can do whatever he pleases. But I'm sure that when he's there, a lot of those things are meditative, but he's having a good time. He's enjoying himself. But they broke this auger pretty well, and this is the second time Dan and John have welded it back together for them. So he was over there just about all day, and when he got home, I'm just sitting there in my chair looking out the window, and he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." "Well, what have you been doing today?" I said, "Nothing, and I'm proud of it." And I think that's where we have to get to in our lives when we're younger, and we've talked about this before, and we're busy, maybe going to school, then careers, families, raising children, and all of those things. We wouldn't know a moment of peace and quiet if it stared us right in the face, would we? And maybe that's why so many people in their younger years don't become as aware, but you can. You can. I think there's a certain time each of us is supposed to wake up. I really do. And whenever that is, you can't go back. You cannot go back. That's a fact. When you decide to, or when it's time for you to start waking up, you can't go backward. And what you found that you tolerated earlier in your life, a lot of noise, a lot of sound, a lot of distraction, you absolutely cannot tolerate it any longer. I remember when I didn't even want to listen to music any longer. I didn't want to listen to it in the car, didn't want to listen to it anywhere. And I remember when I just had to ask Dan, "Now listen, I have to have some quiet time in the morning." And you're welcome to get up and have coffee. But please, I cannot have any distractions. I can't stand the noise. And above all other things, do not turn that television on. Do not. Do not. And I think that's important for all of us, is when we realize the difference between noise and distractions and things that we do enjoy doing. Music we do enjoy hearing. And then music that's just noise. It grates on you, doesn't it? Gets on your nerves. That may be music for someone else, but it's not music for me. Oh, and that television and those loud commercials, you know there's a reason that the commercials get louder, right? So you'll pay attention. So I prefer the days, I guess, when the television isn't on at all. Although there are days when I'm home and I've maybe certainly not working on anything or not writing an article or preparing for a Sunday talk, but when I just want to, I may turn on some mindless program, about that will be a bit of entertainment, but it's not loud and noisy, I guarantee you. But I have found those are the ways that I'm fully present, and if in the morning I can have an hour or so when I get up, just to be quiet, drink my coffee in the quiet, and observe, I can just really, really have a very productive day, no matter what is going to happen. I remember earlier in our lives, and we still had children at home, and Dan and I went to New York with a group of people that he knew. He worked with a man, actually they were partners, and the man's wife owned a travel agency. And so she would take her friends different places at times, and she took us to San Francisco one time for a trip, and she took us to New York for a trip. I think there were 8 of us. And we just had a marvelous time. We saw a play, and just really enjoyed every moment of it. But I remember a woman that went on the trip, and she was the wife of the then mayor of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And she was the calmest, most peaceful, loving, gentle person. She just had this calm about her the entire time. And I observed that, and I loved it. And it was a time when we still had a lot going on in our lives, with careers and children to send to school and encouraged to go on with their lives. And it had been quite hectic at times. So I do remember observing her, though, and thinking, wow, I want that. I want that in my life. Wonder how she does that. She never criticized anybody. She never complained. She just sat. She was fully present wherever she was, whatever she was doing. And I especially remember that day that we were waiting for the car to take us back to the airport, and everybody else is standing and tapping their foot, and wondering and waiting and just anxious, a lot of anxiety, and you could see it and feel it. And she's just calmly sitting there as if all is well with the world. It didn't matter. She knew it would all be okay. I learned more from that woman in observing her than I had learned from a multitude of people I'd been involved with at that point in my life. And I just remember thinking, I want that. I want that in my life too. I want that peace and calm. She didn't need to compare herself to anybody else. But here's the trick. I observed and I did something about it. How many other people observed and just said, isn't that odd? Isn't she an odd duck? She's not worried about all this other stuff like the rest of it. And I observed, and I made a huge difference in my life. It was little by little by little. I noticed that. And I decided I wanted to be fully present wherever I was. I don't want the distractions. Now, as Steve told us in the class this morning, he's talking about the 4 agreements. This is at 9 o'clock, I believe, before church. I'm typically late because I'm doing a few other things, but I try to go in there and participate in the conversation some. And today he spoke about always do your best. Whatever that is, always do your best. Now, what does that consist of? My best today is going to be a heck of a lot better than it was my best 10 years ago, isn't it? So part of being my best today is to forgive myself for the times when I didn't know better, and my best was not perhaps what my best would be today. So perhaps that's the first thing I need to remember about doing my best, is to forgive myself for when I did not know any better than I do today. But I just felt like that was a powerful conversation too. And the distractions sometimes that will keep us from being fully present, just like the man with wanting the job with the telegraph. And he was fully present enough that he heard the code in the distance. What code speaks to you? Is there anything in particular that speaks to you? It doesn't mean that we need to give up all those things that we get excited about. Just like my husband and his friend, they enjoy tinkering with all those different things. And if there's something you enjoy doing, do it. There was a man that went to the doctor. And as he went to the doctor, he confessed, I'm very anxious all the time. I'm high energy. My blood pressure's high all the time. I don't want to have a stroke. The doctor assures him, well, you're going to have one if you don't change things. So you need to change a few things in your life. Do you have a hobby? Anything that you'd enjoy doing and relaxing? And he says, maybe you could take up painting. So the man says, well, that's an excellent idea. He calls the doctor the next day. He says, I love this. I painted 10 yesterday. I can't wait till tomorrow, and maybe I can paint 20. I don't think that's the purpose. Do you? The purpose is to find things that will calm us down. Perhaps it's knitting, quilting, sewing, drawing, gardening. There's something that most of us can agree. It may be walking along the shoreline and picking up trash that others have discarded. You can use that as a form of meditation too, and then not get distracted by what you didn't get to do. Use that as a walking meditation. Walk, whatever it is, enjoy. You don't have to sit for an hour if you don't want. There are other ways to meditate. Rub your hands over your bald head. It works for Matt and Van Diesel. And listen, if it works for Van Diesel, wow, it must have some power, huh? Yeah. Cool. So you don't have to always give up everything you enjoy. Sometimes that's a point of power and something that you can use for a higher purpose. Ken Blanchard tells a story of a young man that he was in Texas. He and his family lived there. He had lost his mother and his father at a young age, and it came time for him to make a big decision about whether he would apply for a job in New York or not. This was a time when there wasn't easy transportation. You didn't just get in your car and drive. You didn't have a car. So his father had recommended to him before his father had died that if he ever needed a wise counselor, to turn to this one particular friend. And so the young man did, and he called upon the man, and he said, I need some advice. He said, I have this young family, you see, and I hear about a job in New York, but that's so far away, and I'm torn about whether I would want to even interview for the job, or especially if we'd want to move there, if I got the job, but it's a tremendous opportunity. He said, there's part of me that just wants to stay right where I am and not do that, but I can't come to a clear decision about whether to even go for the interview. So the man says, give me a couple of days, let me think about it, would you? And then come back and see me, and we'll talk about it again. So the older man thinks about it, and he prays, and so the young man comes back to see him, and he says, do you have any advice for me? He said, I do, actually. He said, I want you to go for the interview. Take the train, go to New York, and on the way, though, I don't want you to take any books. I don't want you to sit next to someone that you're going to have idle chatter. I want you to sit alone the entire time and just listen to your thoughts. I want you to learn to be with you and your thoughts and know what your heart wants you to do. He said, then when you get there, would you call me? And I may have some further advice for you. So the young man takes the train ride, and it's a long distance, as it turns out, from Texas to New York. He had plenty of time to sit, idle time. He thought it would be idle time, but as the train rolled along, he found that it was a fascinating time. He was listening to his thoughts. He's looking out the window. He was enjoying it, and he was hearing things or feeling things he had never felt before. And it was the sound of his own heart beating. And he found that he could hear the voice of God. So just as he'd promised, he called his friend when he got to New York. He says, friend, do you have advice for me now? And the friend says, I have a feeling you don't need my advice, do you? He said, no, I don't. You gave me the best advice anyone could ever give. And that was to find a way to find the time to listen to my own thoughts and feelings. Thank you. That was great advice. Well, the truth is, we each just need to find a way to listen, don't we? Whether it's tapping whether it's the Morse code, whether it's rubbing your head, whatever it is, find the time, find a way that you can be fully present, without complaints, without comparisons, without comments. Be fully present, just you and God. And I guarantee you the answers will come. Thank you for your time.